Spartan women are some of the most fascinating women in history. Due to the men's absent from the city, usually being busy going to war, women were in many ways the true rulers of Sparta. They had more rights and enjoyed greater autonomy than women in any other Greek city-state. They could inherit property, own land, make business transactions, and were much better educated than women in ancient Greece in general. Unlike Athens, where women were considered second-class citizens, Spartan women were said to rule their men. To contemporaries outside of Sparta, Spartan women had a reputation for promiscuity and controlling their husbands, causing the famous philosopher Aristotle to utter,
"In Sparta, women rule the men. Their wealth and love of luxuries is unnatural, and that's why they fell from being masters of Greece to a second-rate power in less than 50 years.
However, this comes from a man that lived and glorified a society, Athens, where women had little more rights than women have under some of the suppressing dictatorship regimes we have today. Unlike other women in Greece at the time, Spartan women were allowed to own and manage their own properties. They inherited everything of value when their husband died, something that happened a lot in warmongering Sparta, and became the biggest landowners in Sparta. They also received a legal status that was equal to that of men. They were definitely not secondary citizens, but seen as equals to men. In contrast, other Greek women were almost always dependent on the men in their family. They had virtually no political rights of any kind, had no education and were controlled by men at nearly every stage of their lives. The most important duties for a woman were to bear children, preferably male, be obedient, and to run the household. In stark contrast, most Spartan women were literate. They also received both an athletic and military education. They neither did domestic work, like cooking and cleaning, or physical work of any kind, that was left to the Spartan slaves, the helots. Spartan women were known to be independent, had to know how to handle weapons, and they also participated in athletic competitions. So, what was it like to be a woman in Spartan society?
Αυτή είναι η ιστορία με τον Μάγνας.
Just like in Viking society, but also in some other cultures around the world, Spartan newborns were checked for apparent strength and vitality. Even though Spartan women weren't warriors, they were still expected to be physically strong and healthy, in order to survive childbirth and produce great Spartan warriors. The women took great pride in having born and raised brave warriors, and if her offspring had died cowardly in a battle, she would mourn his unmanliness in public, for everyone to see. This was to show her shame, and to display to everybody that his family didn't approve of this. Another great duty that Spartan women had to fulfill was to dispose of the baby, if it was either ill, suffered from any deformity or malformation, because this would make the child unfit and unacceptable to Spartan society. Subsequently, Sparta made it the duty of mothers to kill an unwanted baby, usually by throwing them off a high rock, thus ensuring that the infant had a quick death. A consequence of this aspect was that men would preferably marry women that displayed great vitality and strength, and a man would be criticized and mocked if he chose to marry a petite, or thin, delicate woman. Women were judged based on their fitness and childbearing characteristics. And if this sounds to you like a run-of-the-mill sexism, and you now feel the moral muscles in your body start to twitch, please hear me out. While the Spartan attitude toward women definitely wouldn't be acceptable to us today, this actually paved the way for Spartan women and their status as equals to men. They were given more rights than women in any other culture at the time, and even many modern-day cultures. An example of this, we see in the treatment of women who died during child labor. They would be given a gravestone, something that was rare in Sparta. Because the Spartans did not cower from fear, and to die while giving birth was something they viewed equally to men who fought wars and protected their city-state. Spartan men lived separated from the women and stayed in the barracks with the other men, but they were expected to eat together with their wives. While the boys were raised by their fathers until they began life in the agoge, the Spartan education program, which focused mainly on military training, Spartan girls were raised by their mothers. The girls participated in the same physical fitness routines as the boys, where all were naked, but they were also involved in festivals and religious rituals with the men. As well as reading and writing, women studied musique, which consisted of not just music, but also dance and poetry. Along with training in song and dance, these choruses educated girls in Spartan ritual and cultic activities. Dancing kept the children fit, and in Aristophanes' Lysistrata, the Spartan character Lampedo attributes her fitness to the Laconian dance known as the bibasis. This dance involved kicking other people's butts, jumping around, and there was also a competition with this dance, where both Spartan men and women competed to win prizes. The songs and dances also worked as a tool to teach the children Spartan values and gender roles, and was therefore an important part of their upbringing. They were taught how to manage their farm and properties, but also how to defend themselves, since the men were away most of the year. Women therefore had to handle almost everything alone, and thus needed a well-rounded education that included both military and domestic activities. Because of their many physical activities, the Spartan women were allowed to wear what were shockingly short dresses in ancient Greece, that even revealed their thighs. This fashion trend was for other Greek city-states, beyond radical, and proved to them that women were in charge in Sparta. Marriage in Sparta also differed from the other Greek city-states, like Athens, where a girl usually married at 15, to a man that often would be twice her age. Spartan women, on the other hand, were encouraged to get married at a later age, and most of them married when they were between 18 and 20 years old, and her husband was usually in the beginning of his 20s, making marriage and childbirth generally safer and healthier for both mother and child. In order for a girl to attract a male suitor, she had to be a well-trained athlete and compete in sports, in order to attract potential suitors. So the sports competitions were a way for Spartan girls to show how athletic they were, making them attractive to the men of Sparta. The marriage started with the woman shaving her head, put on boys' clothes, and she was then left in a dark room. Her soon-to-be husband would then come and kidnap her with force, take her to their new home, and then she would be left with other women, who prepared her for the marriage night. At some point in the night, her new husband would surprise her, the couple would have sex, and then the man would leave to return to the barracks where he lived. She wouldn't see him again until the next night, or the night after that. Sometimes, years could go by before these married lovebirds actually saw each other in the daytime. Which brings the question, why? According to some historians, this was to help ease the Spartan groom into heterosexuality. He had spent his years and upbringing in the barracks, with the other men where homosexuality was very much natural, and practiced by all Spartan men. Women were allowed to own and inherit their own property, and they were like Viking women, also allowed to divorce their husband, without this destroying her reputation. She would keep full custody of their children, and she could also remarry. And this is how some of the women became the most powerful group in Sparta. The women would inherit after their husbands, before their sons, and if she married again, and her new husband died, she would inherit from him too. This made some of the women become the financial elite in Sparta. They were nicknamed the Spartan heiresses. According to Aristotle, 40% of Sparta's territory was owned and managed by a small group of super-rich women. They even outdid the two kings of Sparta, who sometimes had to borrow money from them when going on campaign. The male politicians, of course, wanted to undo this power elite and tried to create new laws, but the heiresses would always block their attempts by bribing the right people. Because the men were so often away, the women were in many ways the de facto bosses of the household and general city business. Plutarch relates the story of Gorgo of Sparta, the wife of King Leonidas, who when asked by a woman from Attica,
"Why is it that you Spartan women are the only women that lord it over your men?"
Gorgo replied,
"Because only Spartan women give birth to real men."
It's the motherfucking Eagle Double G. Snoop Dogg.
Same-sex relationships, whether between males or females, were considered natural both before and after one was married. Scholar Colin Spencer notes,
Love between two adult men occurred often, but only the effeminate of a man, having characteristics regarded as typical of a woman, was considered unmanly, and this incurred the social degradation.
He points out that this is evident by the degrading terms used for a man who played the part of a woman in sex. No such degrading term seemed to have been applied to female same-sex relationships, and this relationship might also continue after the woman had married. All Spartan women, not just the richest, had helot slaves that performed the domestic tasks that elsewhere in Greece would have fallen to free women. Because activities such as weaving, cooking and washing were not considered worthy of the Spartan women. They were much more occupied with governance, agriculture, logistics and other sustenance tasks. Spartan women were encouraged to produce many children to increase Sparta's military population, and they took very much pride in having born and raised a brave warrior. On the other hand, having sons who were cowards was very shameful, and the ancient author Aelian claims that women whose sons died as cowards mourned this very publicly, for all to see. By contrast, the female relatives of the Spartans who died heroically in the Battle of Leuctra were said to have walked around in public, smiling and looking happy. This was crucial in enforcing social consequences for cowardly men, who knew what a shameful death would mean for him and his family. When Pausanias, a traitor to Sparta, took refuge in a sanctuary to Athena, his mother Theano is said to have taken a brick and placed it in the doorway. Following this example, the Spartans bricked up the temple door with Pausanias inside. Similarly, Pomeroy cites 3 of Plutarch's sayings of Spartan women, which tell of Spartan mothers killing their cowardly sons themselves. Joshua Mark, a freelance writer and scholar, says that,
contrary to Aristotle's assertion, Spartan women had nothing to do with the decline of the city-state. Sparta was at its height, even after decades of warfare, when it challenged the strength of Thebes. At the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, Sparta was defeated by the Theban army under the command of Epaminondas. Epaminondas and Pelopidas inflicted heavy casualties on the Spartans, who lost 400 of their 700 hoplite foot soldiers, and their king, Cleombrotus, also died in the battle.
So, in reality, Sparta was at its best when men and women were regarded as equals. The female Spartan was honored as the equal of the male in her own sphere of power and authority and, even in the accounts of detractors, performed admirably. It could be argued that the strength of the Spartan women allowed for the formidable reputation of the same in the Spartan men. Sparta stands out as one of the most important city-states in ancient Greece, and because of the way it treated its women, Spartan women enjoyed more freedoms and held greater control over their own lives. However, this came at the price of harsher marital and familial duties, which both society and the state expected of them. But this system also made them among the freest women in the world at the time, giving them a lot of power and influence over their own lives, but also making them important influencers over the shaping of Spartan society, and ultimately its history.
I hope you found this presentation interesting.
That was great.
And if you did, please smash the like and subscribe buttons as if you were a Viking berserker. I cover a lot of historical topics here on my channel. So check out my other videos to see if there are others you find interesting. And I hope to see you in the next one.